Hear me okay? I'm Warren Hogue, the IPI Senior Advisor for External Relations, and I'm happy to welcome you to this SRSG Series event featuring Nicholas Kay, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Somalia. When Somalia's federal government assumed office in 2012, it pledged to deliver an ambitious political transformation by 2016. Including the establishment of a federal system in a country that has not had a permanent central government since the start of an intermittent but destructive civil war in 1991. Hence the title of Mr. Kay's talk, Somalia in 2015, Federalism and Delivery. The phrase is one that Mr. Kay has invoked to describe the importance of this year for Somalia as the country moves forward on the goals of establishing that federal system, finalizing a constitution, and holding national elections by 2016. The national effort goes by the upbeat-sounding name of Vision 2016, but the reality has proved to be less inspirational, with political impasses, continuing insecurity, and terrorist attacks from the Al-Shabaab insurgents stalling progress. That makes the role of the international community there even more crucial, and there is intense interest in the country as the size of today's turnout attests to. This IPI series has brought a number of SRSGs here over the years to speak directly and candidly to members of the extended UN community, and they often, as today, work in places that offer staggering challenges for the United Nations. It is a series that I am particularly fond of because, as a former foreign correspondent for the New York Times, I put a high value on information that comes from on-the-ground observation. And as a former foreign editor of the New York Times, the guy who sits in New York and reads the raw files, I know from the receiving end how essential it is for a headquarters audience like this to get that information delivered direct and unvarnished from the field. So I consider these SRSG reports dispatches from the front. And I'm particularly pleased and gratified to note that Mr. Kay is here at IPI today for the second time since becoming the SRSG in Somalia in June 2013. That was the time, by the way, when the long-standing UN political office in Somalia was replaced by the current UN assistance mission in Somalia, known as UNSOM. So today we have a chance to hear firsthand about this strengthened UN presence and how it is working. You have Mr. Kay's full biography in your papers, but just noting the highlights gives you a good idea of the rich experience he brings to the task. He served as Britain's ambassador in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Sudan, and was the Africa director at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London. On his last visit here 16 months ago, Mr. Kay spoke of the work on Somalia's peace and reconciliation process, of peace building and state building, and implementing the rule of law and tightening security. And he said, quote, "The building blocks are there to engender some optimism." So we are grateful to you, Mr. Kay, for coming here today with this update. And the floor is yours either from there or from here, as you wish.
Right, well, thank you very much for the introduction, Warren, and thank you very much for the invitation to IPI. Most of all, thank you to all of you for coming for a free lunch. And do not let me get between you and enjoying your lunch as far as I can. No, I'm very, very heartened to see so many of you here. I think I was, as Warren says, here 16 months ago, just shortly after taking over UNSOM, and there was a good, probably about the same level of attendance, and I assume that was sort of curiosity value and sort of, have a look at this strange new specimen, new SRSG, and that by this time, there would be about sort of half a dozen of you as who'd either got the sort of wrong event or the wrong day. But I'm very heartened. Interest levels remain high, and that is part of my sort of role and task as a special representative also, to try to engender sustained international attention, sustained interest in Somalia. And it is definitely probably the world's busiest time for decades in terms of competing international crises. And it is therefore even more important that SRSGs, and particularly for Somalia, that we get out and we tell our story to people and try to keep that level of attention and interest, which is very, very important. I'm very glad you remembered what I said 16 months ago, and as you were starting to read out the quotation, I wondered what horrific kind of thing was going to come back and bite me, what ridiculous thing I had said 16 months ago. But I'm very glad that it was about the building blocks being there for optimism. And 16 months later, I mean, my tone is still one of optimism, which does actually sometimes lead people to question either my sanity or my level of information. Having also served, as you said, in DRC, I think it was DRC, or maybe it was in Cuba. It was a country where I served where there was a very sort of black humor, sort of gallows kind of humor. And one of the jokes that went around was, what is the difference between an optimist and a pessimist in country X? And the answer was always, the pessimist is the better informed. So it may be that I'm just woefully uninformed, but I am the optimist, and I remain the optimist about Somalia. It is very difficult to get the balance right between those two, and yesterday when I briefed the Security Council, I characterized my sort of sentiments as we start 2015 as sentiments of excitement, which I think is the optimism, and worried, which I think may be the better informed realist one. Excited because 2015 is going to be decisive in terms of whether Somalis can achieve the ambitious goals that they have set themselves, and it bears repeating that they have set themselves to federate their country and to democratize by September 2016. Timelines are very, very short. The business of 2015 is, as Warren said, one of federalism and delivery. So I'm excited by the fact that we are now entering a period which will be absolutely determinant of how far and how successful we are by September 2016. Worried in the short term, because looking back over the last 2.5 years since the federal government was established in September 2012, we who follow it, or you who follow it, all know that we have had 3 prime ministers in less than 3 years. And each time there's a change of prime minister, it has taken months of negotiation, relative stagnation of political progress in the country. And we are now in that period again, where for the last 3.5 months there has been internal discussion, wrangling, some might say, about the establishment of a new cabinet. And we hope that the cabinet will go to Parliament. The list will go on Monday, and I am optimistic, actually, as I told Al Arabiya this morning, I am optimistic that that cabinet should be approved by Parliament, and that it will be sufficiently representative and inclusive to get broad support that it needs in the Parliament. So getting the balance right is quite difficult. If one wants to sort of build a positive picture, and I think it is worth doing so, we always need to stand back a little bit and say, well, what is the Somalia today like compared to the Somalia 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 20 years, 23 years, 24 years ago? And I would maintain that on any measure, the Somalia today is improved against the Somalia of any time in the last 24 years. there will be Somalis in the audience, and I'm looking at the ambassador and other wise heads who will probably be able to sort of pick holes in that argument or whatever. But I think as a relative sort of lay person and professional international diplomat, I would say Somalia, and we should not lose sight of the fact, is now in a better situation than it has been for 24 years. Whatever the short-term problems that are, and they are, existing in terms of the internal political crisis, we should not lose sight of the fact that Somalia now has a functioning parliament, it has functioning institutions, presidency and prime minister, and it has control over much more of its territory than it has done for a long time. So what are the tasks for 2015? As we begin the year and we say it's federalism and delivery, the tasks are essentially to deliver, as Warren said, Vision 2016, which remains the government's plan. Inspirational title, I must admit, at an earlier iteration it was called Plan 2016, which sounded perhaps a bit too Stalinist or something. So Vision 2016 was eventually what it was titled. And that is to achieve the fundamentally important steps for sustainable peace in Somalia. Sustainable peace will not be achieved, I think we would probably all concur, without first building a state. Build a state in order to build a sustainable peace. So Somalis are setting about the task of building their state, which will be a federal state, and Somalia has never been federal before, and it will be a democratic state, and Somalia has not been democratic since 1967, maybe the last democratic sort of elections. So there's quite a lot to be done, and we are behind time, there's no doubt about it. It's a relatively easy three-step approach that's there. Sometimes it's used the image of constructing a house, and there's three phases to that. You dig the foundations, and the foundations are the formation of the federal member states of the new federal Somalia, which are currently termed interim regional administrations. And out of the 18 regions of Somalia, all but 5 are now formed into identifiable interim regional administrations or federal member states. There is a process underway for the central regions, which should be accelerated and completed, we hope, within the next couple of months. And then a second process, which will be for Hiran and Middle Shabelle to form a federal member state or interim regional administration. So that's the foundations. Get in place the federal member states. And then you start building the walls, and the walls are the constitution. And it'll be a new constitution, a federal constitution based on the provisional federal constitution now, but going into the detail of how power, essentially resources, revenue, etc., will be shared between the centre and the regions. And that will be put into a new constitution, which should go to a referendum by March 2016. And then we put the roof on the structure, and the roof is elections for a new parliament, which will elect a president in September 2016. And like building a house, you can't really do it in a different order. You can't start, with a roof or whatever, so we are starting step by step with formation of federal member states, negotiating the new constitution, and then the election. Of course, in reality, those three steps also have to happen slightly concurrently. And so now, for the elections in 2016 to happen, it is imperative that the National Independent Election Commission is established without delay. And that bill is before Parliament, and we are very strongly urging and helping Parliament to finalise and pass that law before they go on their well-deserved holidays sometime in the next week or so. And if we don't get the National Independent Election Commission law passed and the commissioners appointed, then we will lose at least another 2 months, and every day counts now, so we can't afford to lose a day, let alone 2 months. And that's it. I mean, there will be some discussion when you ask me, and probably people will ask about, how credible it is to have what kind of elections in September 2016, etc. Those are all good questions. I can answer them now before you ask them, but we can go in more detail later. But my very short and slightly facile answer, but it's not completely facile, is that that's the roof. We've got a job now to build the foundations, put up the walls. We don't have to decide what color roof we're going to have. We don't have to decide whether it's tin or slate or whatever. We'll get to that. Now we have a job in hand to build the foundations and get the walls up. But conscious of the fact that there will be decisions to be made at the right time about what kind of roof you have. So delivery, that's the federalism bit, if you like, building the federal member state, 2015, that grand design of the foundations and then the walls has to be completed. Delivery, year of delivery, is essentially about trying to ensure across the board that the very groundbreaking, pioneering, important experiment that we are going through in Somalia, where the international community and Somalis have agreed on the New Deal compact based on the New Deal principles from Busan that figured around 5 peace-building, state-building goals, that is the framework and the structure which is governing the partnership between the international community and the government. It took a lot of work from the Brussels conference in September 2013 through to the Copenhagen High-Level Partnership Forum in November to put in place a lot of this architecture and these mechanisms. And that's fine, it's working. I think everybody is now comfortable with it and understands what it's about. But in 2015, it has to start delivering real, tangible, visible benefits for Somali people. And it's a very, again, simple thing. There has to be money poured in at the top of this into the multi-partner trust funds for the World Bank and for the UN that are established. And then the mechanism of the New Deal Compact, the architecture and the steering committee will decide, according to the Somalis' own priorities, how to spend that money on flagship programs, whether it's in rule of law, justice sector, etc. And then those programs have to start happening. And that has to happen in 2015. We are also, therefore, requesting very humbly but insistently to donors that they start putting money into the UN Multi-Partner Trust Fund in order for that process to happen. Other bits of delivery in 2015 are related in a way to the first bit, which is federalism. I mean, what we do, where we do it, and how we do it in 2015 is going to be different to 2014 and 2013. When UNSOM was established, even it was mandated, the government sway, more or less, was a Mogadishu-focused thing. There were no interim regional administrations, no emerging federal member states in south-central Somalia. And Al-Shabaab controlled a vast number of towns, including key ports, etc., across the country. Turn the clock forward, a year and a half later, we now have interim regional administrations established in Baidoa, Kismayo, soon probably through a conference in Adado in Dusa Mareb, and Al-Shabaab have been cleared from at least 16 of the key towns in the last year. So the map and the picture has transformed, and us as the UN and the international community in general in 2015 are engaged in delivery now, not just in Mogadishu, but across the whole country. And we have to work through what that presence will look like, what the tasks will be, and how we sustain ourselves in what is still an insecure environment across the country. So delivery will be, as I say, linked to federalism. It'll be different to 2014. It'll happen in different places and in different ways. In all of this, we have in mined 2016, Vision 2016, September 2016 as a hard deadline. The President himself has repeatedly said there will be no request for an extension of mandate. Whatever happens, September 2016 is a hard deadline. International partners, member states, all thoroughly agree. And so between now and then, we have quite a feat of political engineering to accomplish, supporting the Somali-led and Somali-owned process. And as I say, it's exciting. It's a little bit worrying sometimes. But I think overall, Somalia, against all the competing international priorities, crises, the agenda on the Security Council, Somalia stands out as being a country that is essentially coming together rather than falling apart. And the problems that it's facing are problems and challenges that derive from a country coming together in a different political disposition as a federal state, coming together in a different political order through democracy and more representative government. These throw up enormous challenges, but they are essentially political challenges, and I'm confident that with sustained interest from the international community, sustained assistance, that Somalis will achieve a good deal of the Vision 2016, and I will come back in 18 months' time, maybe, and tell you whether the roof is on, what color it is, whether it's leaking, and be very happy then to answer further questions in 2016. But I'll be also very happy to answer questions before 2016 if you have them now. As I say, I mean, that's a snapshot, and when I briefed the Council yesterday, I can assure you I was far more eloquent and even more detailed than I've been this afternoon. But please, we'll throw the floor open. Your chair.
We'll applaud you, first of all.
Oh, right, okay. And
have a seat now.
Thank you very much indeed.
We're going to go to question and answer. I have a couple of questions of my own for Nicholas K. first,
Very
and
good.
then I see the hand of the ambassador in the front row, and you will be the immediate person to follow me. I want to ask you about the relationship between UNSOM and AMISOM. AMISOM are having more troops than the Somali National Army. How does that work, and is it working effectively?
The relationship between UNSOM and AMISOM, how does that work, and is it working effectively? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Good. I mean, again, this is one of the exciting and remarkable things about the Somalia peace. There is an unprecedented partnership happening between the African Union and the United Nations. And it's not just confined to that as well. I mean, we should recall that the European Union is a key part of that partnership. The European Union pay the stipends for the African Union forces. The UN provides the logistic support to them, and the African Union provides the forces themselves. And I think it has proven itself a successful model. The task which was given to the African Union was essentially peace enforcement, a warfighting mission. They have achieved that at huge cost and sacrifice actually to them, and we should pay tribute to that and never forget it. And the security gains, creating the security environment for this political engineering task to happen, is I think progressing quite well. It goes to a new phase now a little bit, and that's a challenge for 2015 as well. Having now recovered towns and area and districts from al-Shabaab, in 2015 there has to be the delivery of some kind of stabilization dividend effect for the people in those areas. And that will require AMISOM re-examining a little bit its own concept of operations, and the UN as well. And we'll do that jointly with the African Union in April as we conduct a strategic review. On the ground, the partnership is very strong. When I briefed here last time, 16 months ago, I was sitting with the African Union Ambassador Anadif at that time, the head of AMISOM, This time I would definitely be with the new ambassador, Sidiku, but he's in Mogadishu, minding the shop, if you like, whilst this political crisis is unfolding on the ground there. But he and I are in constant, we are so modern, WhatsApp contact. So the relationship is pretty good. Yeah.
The other thing I want to ask you is about working conditions for you, for the UN, in Mogadishu. We all remember well Augustine Mahiga, who was of Tanzania, who was in your position. And at that time, you're not hearing me? You hearing now? Yes. Okay. I was just motioning from the back. And at the time that Augustine Mahiga took over the job, the UN was still based in Nairobi. And I know since then they've made the move to Mogadishu. How difficult is it for you to get around? You have to go with armored transports. Do you really have access to people, or is insecurity still a really worrisome thing in Mogadishu?
Thank you. You can hear me? Yes. I'm worried about all these aircraft crashing or whatever. Are you controlling them? Or,
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yes, security in Mogadishu. How is it? I mean, it's a volatile and slightly sort of dangerous place to be because there is an al-Shabaab threat and capability. They have an intent and capability still to cause harm. There is a sort of perception that 2014 things have got a bit worse in Mogadishu. I think that's not right because I took the precaution of looking at the statistics or asking for the statistics. And terrorist incidents that our DSS colleagues logged in Mogadishu in 2013 were about just under 800. And in 2014, were about 480. So quite a significant drop. Now, what I think has happened is that al-Shabaab have conducted sort of more high-profile, spectacular, headline-grabbing attacks. And so there is a perception of a worsening situation.
Particularly the one in December at the airport.
December at the airport, infiltrating the UNSOM protected area was certainly unsettling for those of us who live there, but also high profile on Christmas Day, etc. Killing people at their Christmas lunch in the mess. And IEDs as well. I looked at that, because there's quite a lot of talk that now because al-Shabaab are no longer controlling towns and territory, they're resorting to more asymmetric, more IEDs, etc. Actually, the figures for IED attacks again in Mogadishu over the last 3 years have been pretty constant, about 120 a year. I mean, that's far too many to say it's a very safe place or a very comfortable place, and 480 terrorist incidents in Mogadishu doesn't make it a safe place either, but is it improving? I would say yes, and the figures sort of bear that out. How do we move? We move. We take care. I take a lot of care of my staff. I mean, it's a huge responsibility and concern to be the head of the UN there, where staff are putting their lives in danger each day just by being there, let alone moving outside to interact with Somalis. We had 2 attacks on convoys, UN convoys in 2014. We lost no staff. Why not? Because we travel in heavily protected convoys with armed escorts and armored B6 vehicles that did the job. They kept us safe. Unfortunately, many Somalis, bystanders and things, lost their lives, and that is very sad, but we kept our staff safe. So with the right measures, we're able to operate. I travel out more or less daily, and you don't go for a sort of stroll around the streets or a sort of coffee in the local coffee shop. Unfortunately, one would like to do that. One goes in sort of targeted convoy moves from place X to place Y. But we deal every day with Somalis, officials, government officials, security forces, etc., in a way that you cannot do if you're in Nairobi. I mean, it's rather obvious, really. But I mean, if you're going to be the UN assistance mission to Somalia, you should actually be in Somalia. I'm a simple-minded person. I thought that was right in June 2013, and I still think it's right.
We're going to go to the floor now. If you would raise your hands, I'll call on you. When the microphone gets to you, please identify yourself and hold the microphone very close to your mouth. I'm going to ask the first person. I will introduce him, Ambassador Douale of Somalia in the front row. Would you ask the first question, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. This is not the first time I'm here. I have the pleasure and the privilege of attending a good professional discussions here in this forum. Having said that, I acknowledge, yesterday we acknowledged Mr. K's presentation at the UN, at the Security Council. And we also acknowledged that we said on behalf of the federal government of Somalia that we are very much appreciative of his personal efforts as well as the UNSOM in general. And he has done a lot of progress together with, of course, the whole system of the United Nations and international cooperation. Now, he mentioned a lot of details which I will not go through because I don't have all the facts that he has. So, however, you see, between optimism and worry, now I believe we are more on the phase of optimism rather than worry. Worry is always there, even if the situation is completely peaceful and tranquil, like in any other country. However, we still have our problems, and the problems are there. The fact is that now the movement towards progress is seen and it looks achievable. For the first time in a quarter of a century, for 25 years now, 26 years. Now it seems achievable. So we join the optimism rather than the worries. We also acknowledge that there has been in this stabilization and security and so on, and even in forming the various federal type of institutional states, still there is a lack of administrative capacity, which I'm sure he is aware of. Now it is how to build that. And we realize now more than before, because of the regional state capacities are not there. So you have to build now that one and show that the federal government has the ability and the expertise and the support to deliver these these facilities that are needed. I have to join also, as you have mentioned about UNSOM. I must say that UNSOM has done a good job, together, of course, with the rudimental Somali forces that we have, which are less, of course, equipped and so on, and less much trained. However, they have liberated more than 80% of all the country now, practically, especially in the central and southern regions. UNSOM, we believe, has done a good job, and also we acknowledge the support that is given to UNSOM by the European Union and by the international community in general as well, and the training that they undergo. Finally, I must say that I fully appreciate that every 16 months or 18 months, Mr. K comes and briefs us and briefs everybody, so that at least the optimism will increase, as he put it, hopefully. Thank you very much. I have no other question.
That's right. And he's just promised to come back in 18 months, so good for you. I'll take 2 or 3 questions at once now. In the front row, number 1, number 2. I saw the hands, number 3 here. So if you would introduce yourselves, please, and then we can answer 3 at once, okay?
3 at once. Excellent.
Yes, how do you do? My name, excuse me. My name is Ann Phillips. I'm a member of the board of IPI. Welcome back to IPI, and I too look forward to 18 months from now to hear all of your achievements then. What I'm interested to know what the impact has been, if indeed there has been any at all, on the North as a result of the violence and the conflict in the South. And if there has been any impact, has it affected the process at all?
Okay, and number 2 right there.
Thank you very much. My name is Patrick McCarthy. I work with UNDP. First of all, thank you to IPI for organizing this event and to the SRSG for briefing us. My question is concerning security and arms control in Somalia. Somalia has been under an arms embargo for a number of decades, which has been partially lifted in order to allow the federal government to build the capacity of its own security and law enforcement agencies. But as we know, the country is still awash with weapons. It's a problem that's going to have to be addressed. My question is just a general one. In what way is UNSOM able to support the federal government to build its capacity, first of all, to properly manage those weapons that it needs to fight alongside AMISOM to displace al-Shabaab? And what particular support measures the UN can take to support the federal government? Thank you.
Thank you, and in the front row here.
Hello, my name is Lamin, and thank you. Oh, sorry. I just want to thank you for coming today and briefing us and highlighting your goals, and most particularly the building sustainable peace in Somalia. Closer, sorry. You can't hear me?
Just hold it close to your mouth.
Okay, yeah, the sustainable peace goal, particularly the inclusion of women in peace processes. During your Security Council briefing yesterday, you mentioned that there were challenges presented by the elders and transitional leaders to inclusion of women in peace-building processes. I would just like to know how you're going to counter those challenges and what's the status of your support to various women's groups to participate in regional dialogues and political processes.
Thank you. Got those 3?
Yeah. I've got them. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the ambassador also for your kind words at the beginning. And one of the points you made is about the lack of administrative capacity, in particularly the emerging interim regional administrations, emerging federal member states. And I think that is a huge challenge. I said to the Security Council yesterday, I think in the closed session, that we've been mandated as UNSOM to assist with state building, and that was fine sort of 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago when we were mandated, because that meant then pretty well state building at the federal level, strategic policy advice, and good offices function at the sort of Mogadishu level. Now, 18 months later, we have these interim regional administrations, emerging federal member states, and suddenly our task of providing that state building support has multiplied by at least 5, because we have 5 sub-federal units which also have enormous needs to have their capacity developed so that they can deliver and be accountable to the people of their regions. So our job got bigger. We are victims maybe of some of our own success. But it is something which the UN, jointly with UNDP, are working very, very closely on in Baidoa particularly and in Kismayo. And we will be ready to do similar in the central regions. But it's a work of great partnership too, because the UN cannot do it itself, and it requires certainly some of the member states to fund and participate more actively too. What we can do as the UN is actually be present in these places, and we have offices and we have logistic platform which others can use to operate from. The question about is the impact of the violence in the north, in the south,
Yes.
on the north.
On the north, if indeed there has been any.
If indeed there has been. Yeah, I mean, there's been some displacement. Al-Shabaab have found life in South Central less comfortable in the last year because of the combined SNA UNSOM offensive, and there's definitely been a sort of resurgence, if you like, of their activity in the Galgala hills in northern Puntland. Which is being dealt with by the Puntland forces as well in the last month or so, some quite active engagements there. And there is a little bit more Al-Shabaab sort of presence activity in Puntland. But the main concentration of Al-Shabaab lies along the Juba Valley area, still in South Central, and that is really now their sort of last holdout. And in 2015, year of federalism and delivery, and one of the things we've got to do is deliver those towns along the Juba Valley to the federal government. And the other displacement we're seeing, of course, is unfortunately more activity of Al-Shabaab in Kenya, and there is no doubt that their lack of success, the fact they've lost bases, training camps, revenue sources in Somalia, I am sure, is leading to a displacement, unfortunately, to the wider region, which means that we need much more a regional counterterrorism approach, which is, nascent, but to do with better intelligence sharing, better monitoring of borders, better strategic communications initiatives across the Horn region. So UNDP question about security sector arms embargo. I mean, one of the things that UNSOM is doing and is mandated to do is to assist the federal government with their weapons and ammunition management, and there is a program in place to do that. We have helped to conduct a baseline survey where the armories in Mogadishu and one or two other places have been opened by the federal government, and we've been able to assist them in doing a stock take so that we actually know what sort of is there, and also weapons marking systems. There is more to be done on that in 2015, and it will, the federal government will have to be able to demonstrate its better management of its weapons and ammunition if it is to convince the council to sustain its partial lifting of the embargo. So there is important work to be done on that. Inclusion of women, I'm glad you raised that. Yes, I did say yesterday to the Security Council briefing that we're disappointed so far that the inclusion of women's participation in the political process isn't great. And I did say that because a lot of these processes are determined still by elders and clan-based systems, so that when it's putting together, for example, the conference and the delegates in Baidoa that will elect eventually the president of the Southwest Administration, most of the clans that nominate people don't nominate women. And so there's very, very underrepresentation of women there. How do we get around that? I mean, one of the ways we're working with a Somali Women's Leadership Initiative, which UNSOM has sort of established with a group of leading Somali activist women, giving them some capacity building, funding them as moderately, and we help them to deploy at their initiative down to Baidoa to advocate on behalf of women's participation in the process. We'll continue to do that, and we'll continue just to advocate publicly too. It's disappointing. I've spent a lot of my time, for example, in Puntland about a year ago, trying to convince the elders there that they should nominate more women for the parliament in Puntland. In the end, we didn't really do very well, despite promises to the contrary from people. So yeah, it is a big part of the activity of UNSOM to try to promote that. And it's not just women's inclusion in the political process that we advocate for. I mean, these political processes happening at the sub-federal level need to be inclusive, full stop. And we see that in Jubaland, as it's popularly known as well, where, again, it is necessary that the assembly that's being built there, put together, is fully representative and fully inclusive of all marginalized and minority groups. Good, thank you.
We'll take three more. In the front row will be the first, and then in the back, the second, and then right here.
I'm Ahmed Dakar.
Very close to your mouth, like that.
Sorry, I'm Ahmed Dakar, retired UNDP representative, and currently advising the Somalia mission to the UN. Could you kindly comment on the situation of the returning refugees, Somali refugees from Kenya, and the internally displaced refugees also, especially in the areas liberated from the Al-Shabaab control? Thank you.
Where was the second I pointed to? No, that was the third. In the back, yeah.
Hi, my name is Olivier Cosset. I work in the evaluation office of UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, and I was in Mogadishu and Garowe in last June, for an evaluation of what UNDP does over there. I wanted to discuss the roof, the color of the roof, or how it's designed, a little bit following upon the question about female representation, political representation. The question is, when I was in Mogadishu and Garowe, a lot of commenters were saying, aren't we trying to impose on Somalia a democratic model or a political system that is inherently foreign and Western, whereas in fact they have their own political systems? You mentioned the clan elders and et cetera, et cetera. And we could, and we are, in fact, currently working through that system for the election of representatives, for example, in the Puntland parliament. So the question is, are we sort of wedged to Western democracy with one person, one vote? Or can the UN afford to support political processes that are perhaps more Somalian? Thank you.
And third here.
Thank you. Ambassador, you mentioned that the federal government comprised 18 regions. The question would be, do you consider, if possible, whether that many regions within a federal government makes it even more difficult, or it might be or less difficult if there were 2 or 3 regions? Thank you.
Okay.
Refugees.
Right, okay, thank you, yes. For a retired UNDP, I'm sure UNDP people never retire. The refugees is a part of the good news story. I mean, I am very heartened by the fact that towards the end of 2014, for the first time for 23 years, the flow of refugees has been reversed, and that a UNHCR, federal government of Somalia, government of Kenya, tripartite initiative has opened the borders, and voluntary organized returns of refugees have started from Kenya. Very small, I mean, it's deliberately a pilot project, and so far about 1,200 or so individuals have crossed back. The aim is 10,000 in the first 6 months. But I think, that is incredibly significant in terms of a milestone of and an indicator of progress. That doesn't mean to say that there are not a vast number of issues still facing returning refugees, and it's not the time yet for mass returns, and there are many parts of the South Central where it isn't particularly benign for people to return to. But I think voluntary, assisted program is definitely the way to go. And it's hard, you know, UNHCR, for example, provided 13 fishing boats and training and livelihoods assistance to people returning to Kismayo in this program. And it's small kind of things, but it's very well thought out, very well-designed program, and I think it's good. Big question for, again, UNDP are busy today, about imposing, I mean, it's tricky. I mean, quite frankly, from my point of view, all I am trying to do is help the Somalis to implement their provisional federal constitution that they have designed and agreed and endorsed through through a very large consultative process back in the summer of 2012, which was involving all the traditional elders from all over the country, and so it's their plan, Vision 2016, to federate their country and to democratize their country by September 2016. So I don't feel that I personally, or UNSOM personally, is imposing some blueprint. What we are trying to do is assist them to deliver the blueprint that they have come up with. And it's also, you know, striking. I was relatively soon after arriving quite involved in Puntland, because Puntland was trying to have democratic, local level, district level elections. And a lot of effort, donors and things have gone into technically preparing the ground for that. And in the end, it was probably the political preparation hadn't been done sufficiently, and those elections were triggering violence and conflict. And so the Puntland government decided to scrap those, and they went back to a elders-based selection process for the parliamentary election. And we have no problem with that as the UN, absolutely. And it had, you know, some definite merits, and I have a lot of respect for the elders, and I spent a lot of time with them in the run-up to the parliamentary selections. One thing I was struck by was they themselves did not want to be doing this, and they wanted it to be the last time that they would be involved in doing this. At least that's what they said. I mean, you know, maybe they were not being honest or whatever, but I was struck by, you know, how very much that they felt this was not really the task of elders to do. I mean, elders have many roles in the community to do and many responsibilities, but they were very much looking forward to the day when they could hand over to a more democratic system. And I think one of the shortcomings, as we see, of the elders-based selection process is that it doesn't throw up an inclusive parliament, inclusive representation. Women have absolutely very little chance of being nominated under that system, and other lesser minor clans and marginalized groups also. So it's a long answer, but I mean, it's not as if everybody either is trying to annihilate sort of this 4.5 balance that goes through things as well, that, you know, exists deep in the DNA, and will do for some time. But 18 regions, too many. Yeah, I mean, they are too many, absolutely. And that's why they are grouping themselves together into the Provisional Federal Constitution says that the new federal member states will be made up of at least 2 or more of these regions. So in the Jubaland, it is 3 regions that have come together. Southwest administration is 3 as well. In the central regions, it will be 2, although some would argue 1.5, but anyway, that's and then also in the Shabelle, Middle Shabelle, Hiran will be. So that in the end, there will be putting aside Somaliland for the moment, who is a sort of case apart to some extent, you will have Puntland, you will have central regions, Puntland central regions, another sort of Shabelle Hiran region, Southwest, and Jubaland. So you've got 5. And then the question of Mogadishu, whether it will join one of these federal member states or it'll have a distinct status as a capital city area. So you'll get 5 units, as it were, which I think is probably a workable number, but certainly 18 would be a lot. Profligate.
I'll take 3 more. Number 1, number 2, and number 3.
Afternoon. I'm part of World Vision International's humanitarian operations team, and just as we're concerned about the protection of our staff and the humanitarian community, we're also concerned about the protection of civilians. Is there any update on the civilian casualty tracking analysis and response cell that you can offer us?
Where was the second person I pointed to?
Yeah, hi, thanks. It's, hi.
Oh, there you go, good.
Yeah, thanks for the briefing, Mr. Kay. It's James Reinl, Al Jazeera. I've got a question on banking. I've got a question on banking and terrorism financing. I think on Friday, a California-based bank, Merchants Bank, is going to be stopping transactions between the US to Somalia. I think it might be the last one doing so. Some US lawmaker has described it as a potential catastrophe financially for Somalis. What do you think so? And a sort of second part to the question is, this obviously hasn't happened before. A year or 2 ago, it was Dahabshil and Barclays, and it's happened a number of times. And I'm wondering if you think there is a paradigm by which Western financial institutions seek to stop money ending up in terrorist hands, often in developing parts of the world like Somalia, and in doing so, they stop money going into grassroots projects, people that are building their communities, and stunting the development of these countries, and therefore possibly having a knock-on negative effect when it comes to tackling terrorism.
Thank you. And who did I designate as number 3? There you are, Shirley. Wait for the microphone. Hold it very close to your mouth, please.
Shirley Chesney from NGO Committee on Disarmament and Human Rights. I'm concerned about the
We can't hear you. You have to hold it close, yeah.
I'm concerned about the young people who have known only war and terrorism. Are there any people on the ground, such as the child protectors from the Children in Armed Conflict program? Or is there anything to help with the transition from the refugee camps back to Somalians, 5 federated countries? Isn't now the time to make some plans dealing with the youth? Because without it, they take many, many years to take effect. And I wonder what your plans are in relation to that. It relates to the refugee camp question.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. World Vision, yeah. Update on the Civil Casualty Tracking Analysis Cell, CCTAC. This is something which UNSOM and the African Union have been mandated to establish, and it has taken quite some time to come. And I'm not necessarily 100% up to date on it, but I remember having a conversation with UNSOM colleagues a few weeks ago, and they were saying that after some delay, they have now recruited the staff, are now recruiting the staff. So it's moving forward, and it's important that it does move forward, and it has been a slow process for doing so. The question, Al Jazeera, about remittances and banking and things like that, it's very difficult. It really is difficult, and I should certainly sort of issue a sort of disclaimer before I say anything, which is that I'm not a legal expert, and I'm not a banking expert either, and I'm not sort of presuming to make any kind of judgment on US law or on commercial decisions that the institutions, banks or whatever will make. I'm sure I'm sure everybody is applying law and applying commercial judgment as they see fit. What I can say is, for the end of the telescope on the ground in Somalia, that if the $1.2 billion that are coming each year in remittances don't arrive, then clearly there would be an enormous impact. You know, $1.2 billion is by far the largest sort of component of their economic activity. So it would be very concerning if people no longer had access to remittances arriving. How you balance the tension between, you know, avoiding exploitation of these less formal banking systems by terrorists, and how you balance that interest against the interests of people receiving remittances is very difficult, I know. Clearly, there's been some talk, and I think some planning to try and design safe corridors by which funds and remittances could be transferred. That seems like a good avenue to explore. But eventually, obviously, within Somalia, creating a properly regulated formal banking system would also be the right thing to achieve. But in the short term, yes, I mean, if those remittances were to stop, there would be an impact upon people's livelihoods and lives, and indeed the economic activity within the country, because the diaspora fund quite a lot of the business and growth opportunities within the country. They're investing in real estate, businesses, hotels, etc. On the children, and it links a little bit to your question about children and youth, in terms of protection, child protection and things, it is something that UNSOM is mandated to assist the federal government in, and we have child protection advisors there, and I think are making reasonably good progress in terms of getting mainstreamed, for example, within AMISOM and the Somali National Army, a lot of training on child rights, human rights in general, mechanisms in place for dealing, a proper national policy on dealing with disengaged combatants, child soldiers who are disengaging, and improved conditions for handling them. On the positive side as well, I mean, just a few weeks ago, the federal government ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is very good. Been long in the coming, and now it's important, obviously, there should be a proper action plan for implementing the commitments under that. Not just children, though, but you mentioned youth, which is a slightly different category. I'm glad. I mean, this is one of the sort of bigger, longer-term challenges which I do get worried about in Somalia. The demographics are the same as in many countries, of course. 70% of the population, 70% under the age of 30. But in a country, you know, with virtually no formal employment at all, and many of these have gone through generations, with a generation at least with very little education, so literacy rates and skills rates are very, very low. The answer, and therefore the conditions exist which are exploited by Al-Shabaab and could be exploited by other extremist groups or ideologies as well. There's a huge breeding ground, if you like, potential there. So the big challenge is to get the economy working, to create jobs and create economic activity and opportunities for this mass of young people. The house that we're building is largely a political state-building task, and I think it's fundamentally important. As I said, my premise is you will not have lasting peace unless you have built a inclusive and functioning state. So, you know, we're doing that. Priority task number one: foundations, walls, roof, etc. So, and you know, progress on that is fairly reasonable. So the political track is fairly reasonable. Security track is going reasonably well in terms of recovering territory and ground from Al-Shabaab. It's going less well, but not disastrously, in terms of helping Somali National Security Forces to develop and stand on their own 2 feet. 2015, we have to do a lot more on that. Integration of militia and also active equipping, training of sufficient police and military. We've got ground to make up on that, but there is a plan in place, and that's sort of progressing. The third pillar, if you like, sort of economic, the sort of reactivation of the economy, reconstruction and economic development that would allow young people, etc., to have jobs and lasting economic opportunities. That third leg is more challenging, and there isn't necessarily a adequate plan in place, I don't think, for massive reconstruction and development that the country needs. It needs infrastructure, roads. I mean, are virtually non-existent outside of Mogadishu in terms of tarmac and usability. It needs ports, needs electricity. All these rather big-ticket infrastructure items, without which it will be quite hard to generate lasting economic growth, and it's struggling. Somalia itself can't do it. It's one of the world's poorest countries. Its budget this year, the government's budget to run its whole country on, is $260 million. Only half of which comes from its own resources. The other half is direct budget support. So 120 odd million from your own resources. Most shops you'll find along any of the avenues and streets in Manhattan probably have a turnover higher than that each year. And so it is an outstandingly poor country. It's not qualified for any more loans because it's a highly indebted poor country, but it hasn't yet qualified for HIPC debt relief. So there's no more IFI money that's going to come in to do the necessary major infrastructure stuff. And it's still too dangerous for many private investors to invest as well. So I do have a concern on that front.
We'll take the last questions now. I'll start with Lami in the front row. Anybody else? Then Lami will have the last word. Lamine
with IPI. You closed your presentation with accelerated process to get to Vision 2016. How likely do you think that is when Parliament, since its establishment, has only passed 8 bills, not including the one you mentioned about the children in armed conflict, but due to the infighting and the always kicking out prime ministers. So how likely do you think your accelerated process will be?
Good question. Again, it's sort of glass half full, glass half empty kind of thing. I mean, my glass is usually half full. I mean, it's only done, whatever you said, 8 pieces of legislation. I haven't really counted them up, but and I wasn't there during the transitional federal government, but I have an understanding that that will be 8 more than the transitional federal parliament did. So, starting from a low base, as it were, actually 8 is not bad if the previous parliament did 0, as I'm told it did. Now, and some of the ones that the laws that it's passed are essential laws for putting in place the building blocks, the institutions for Vision 2016. Clearly it needs to do more, but I think, we should recognize that this is a parliament that is actually working as a very recognizable parliament works. It's got a good committee system, it's got good leadership, and they take their jobs very seriously, at some cost to themselves. 16 parliamentarians have been killed since September 2012. This is not a job that you take on if you're a little bit concerned about your personal health and safety. So let's give credit to them. It's an institution, it's a nascent institution, but it's actually doing something, and it's doing a function as well of holding the executive and the presidency to account. Checks and balances. At the heart of this political crisis is Parliament was not comfortable with what the presidents and the Prime Minister was proposing, and they've exercised a degree of check and balance. I think that's so. I think that there's good in this. What is worrisome about it, though, is that sometimes the line between holding to account and holding hostage is a bit blurred. And clearly, as the nation is going through a nation building, state building exercise at the moment, there needs to be a spirit of recognizing the greater national interest, respecting national unity, and compromise in all their political dealings. That, I think, is this kind of spirit we need to foster and encourage in the next 18 months if they're going to celebrate in September 2016 with a beautiful house, strong foundations, solid walls, and a roof of a color and design yet to be seen. Thank you very much for your attention.
I'll just say that Nicholas has now given me the quote that I can use when he comes back in 18 months, the prediction of the full house being built. Thank you very much on behalf of all these people who come to hear you, on coming here with regularity and speaking to us all about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren.